The purpose of this video is to give an overview and an explanation of what I'm doing with the transcription files of Jude that I received from Dr. Tommy Wasserman, and how I prepare those for collation, and then how I collate those in the standalone collation editor by ITSY, and I am using here David Flood's fork of that. Here you can see on David Flood's GitHub where I get the software from. I'll be using a suite or collection of scripts that David developed for help in collating text and preparing text called Criticus. And then down here, the standalone collation editor is what will ultimately collate Jude 1 in that for the purposes of this demonstration. But first, I'd like to explain exactly what data I'm using and how I'm preparing it for the collation editor. In collating the manuscripts of Jude, I'm not directly using the manuscripts to collate. I make reference to the manuscripts if I have any questions about the transcription or am unclear as to what Dr. Wasserman is referring to. But in general, I am sticking with the transcriptions. Dr. Wasserman's transcriptions are available at the Data Archiving and Networking Services. They're available upon request by permission. Those transcriptions look like this. They come all in one file, and they are marked up with Dr. Wasserman's own notation and markings. Nomina sacra are marked, comments are added. You can see here where the first hand, the copyist hand, and then there's a corrector hand. Right as they stand, these transcriptions are not in any shape to be used by the collation editor. These files need to be cleaned up. So each witness needs to be in its own text file. We need to remove some of this notation because it's not helpful for preparing it for the collation editor. So with some help, I was able to get these cleaned up. And a cleaned up file, for example, if you look at, this is witness 1831, and each line of text has its own number, followed by a space, followed by the text. Many things have been removed. For example, the corrector hands and other sorts of comments and notation have been removed. They could be added back in for use in the OpenCBGM with reference to the transcriptions themselves or with reference to Tommy Wasserman's critical apparatus. But notice that some things are still included in here. For example, lacuna, or the lacunae are still included. You have places where he notes certain reconstructions. You can see here, for example, in verse 4, where you have eis tuta ta crima and then a lacunae, which would be acebes. You can see that that corresponds to the actual manuscript, if you were to come look at it, that you have here tuta, ta, and then what looks like crema, very light, then you have a lacuna. And in Dr. Wasserman's transcription, he notes that it's 7 characters long, which would correspond to acebes, then followed by tain to theu hemon down here. So you can see how that lacuna rather is reflected in the transcription, and then that'll appear in the collation editor. So it's been cleaned up. Once the files have all been cleaned up, and they all have their own, and you can see here in this folder, each witness has its own text file, and they're labeled in a particular way. They're named in a particular way so that David Flood's Criticus script can then take these and convert them into JSON files, which are usable by the standalone collation editor. So we'll do that now. Once you've downloaded it and it's installed on the system, you just need to, we just need to call it up. That Python on the Mac, I'm using the Mac, Python 3 space -m space Criticus. On the Windows, it's a little bit different, but on David's GitHub, he has all the instructions for running it. So once you run it, then it opens here. And in order to convert those plain text transcriptions to the proper JSON format, he has a script here, plain text to JSON. And in here, you would select the units to convert, which is all the verses in the file, auto from file name, the transcription info. That's why we named the files a certain way. And then you want to find an output directory. I would output here just to my desktop. And you can convert a single file or an actual whole directory. We'd want to convert the whole directory. So I have them in here. So you can see in that folder, well, you would just select that folder, choose, and then it's going to automatically convert them. And when it's done, it just stops. And if you go over to the desktop, you'll see, oh my, I didn't mean to do that. I think I should have selected an actual folder in which to put them in. So word to the wise, create a folder and then save them to that folder. Otherwise, you get this on your desktop. But you see how it works in each of these individual files. Then there is. You can open each one up, and inside each individual one, you have a JSON file corresponding to each verse in Jude. If you were to open up any one of these, you would see its structure. And this is what the standalone collation editor reads. You have the witness up here, the ID. It's Jude 1, right? And then you have the text. You have the transcription of Jude 1. And then each of these words, each of the words in the transcription is then broken down and given a token, which the standalone collation editor uses when it does its alignment. So that's what it looks like. Once you have all of these, and if we were just a moment, let me pause this and put all of these files on my desktop into an actual folder. And you can see now here's a folder on my desktop called JSON. And if I were to open it, inside is a folder for each witness. And inside each folder is a verse, a JSON file with a verse for each verse, which is extant in that file, ready for collation. Now we have to put this JSON file in a special place. So when you've downloaded the standalone collation editor, you can download it anywhere. I put it in my public folder to make it easy to find. You want to go into it and you want to find the folder called Collation, and inside that folder there's a data folder. Inside the data folder there's a project folder and a text repo folder. The JSON folder goes into the text repo folder. So we'd come back and we're just going to drag it and drop it in. And we'll just clean it up. And there we go. Once it's in there, now the standalone collation editor will draw all the data from this folder. Now, the project folder, and this is important, inside the project folder is a default folder. Inside the default folder, let me get rid of this, there's a folder called config.json. If you open this up, you see that config.json is a very simple file. It has an ID and a name, which I've just named Jude Complete. It's got all of the manuscripts, the extant manuscripts of Jude. And it asks you for a base text. I'm using the Robinson-Pierpont Byzantine text form for my base text. And then it has a witness list. This witness list should contain all the witnesses you're using, and these witnesses then correspond to the folders in the JSON file, or in the JSON folder that we looked at just a moment ago that we produced with Criticus. Now, Criticus has yet one more app or script that is very useful. Among these, there is the reformat collate, not this one, I'm sorry, the configure collation editor. You go down here, and this little script allows you to modify that config.json file. Now, mine is all set up, but you would access it by browsing to that folder where that is, and you select it, and then you click open, and then it will open it up here, and then you update it. It'll populate these. If you want to change the base text, you can. If you want to change the project title, you can, and that will actually modify that config file. Here you can add and move witnesses. So if we needed to move O2 to the excluded list, we could select it and move to excluded. Of course, we could also select it here and move it back to included, and that's actually changing that config file underneath. So you can use this interface to modify that file. You don't have to do it by hand. And once it's configured, once you've moved your excluded witnesses to here, and you have your included witnesses here, and the excluded witnesses would be those witnesses where Jude 1 is not extant, so the collation editor will skip those and will not take them into account when doing the collation. So once that's done, you can start the collation editor. You can start it from here, which is an easy way to start it, or you can start it from the command line. And the collation editor is it's a Java program, and it runs in the browser. It creates a virtual server on your system, and then it all just runs in the browser. So you could start it from here, and then it would open the browser up to the page, or if you're so inclined, and I'm going to close Criticus for a moment, close. If you're so inclined, you can run it from the command line by navigating to the folder, public, that's where I have it, standalone collation editor, and you can see if you list all the files in that folder, there is this file called startup.sh. That's really the only file you need to worry about here. And the way you do that on the bat file is for Windows users. So I'm using a Mac. The way you do that on a Mac is sh startup, and you call up that script. David Flood has instructions for Windows users on his GitHub. Once you do that, you're going to see it's going to type out some information here, and once it says here HTTP server started, we're ready to go. You can minimize this window, and I'm just going to close all this stuff up that we've been looking at and go back to my browser. Use Firefox. I think Chrome, you can use Chrome too, but I've had the best success using Firefox. And the way you get to the program is you type in localhost 8080. And it will be at that address that you'll find the collation editor. So you do that, and you can see it's starting up. It's gathering all of its information, and you can see that it's drawing off of that config file that we looked at and configured with Criticus, Jude complete, that's the title. And here it wants you to select a verse. Now you need to type in the verse. We're going to type in Jude 1, and that corresponds, just note that, remember, in the text repo, in the JSON folder, you have all the witnesses, each in their individual folder with their individual name of the witness, and inside each folder there's an individual JSON file per verse. Note how that's spelled, or how the format of the file name, Jude 1, no spaces. You don't have to put the JSON extension on there, just the name of the file, or the way the verse is structured. And so what the collation editor is going to do is it's going to go into each one of these folders and pick out that file. If that file's not there, say in this particular witness, Jude 1 was not extant, then you won't have a JSON file for Jude 1, or you shouldn't. And when the collation editor goes into the folder and says, oh, there's no file for this verse, it treats it as lacunose.